The room looked like success had been poured into a glass and lifted to the light crystal chiming under chandeliers, while cameras clicked and people murmured our names as if we were one word. I stood a step off the stage so I wouldn't block the view, smiling the way wives are expected to smile when the spotlight belongs to their husbands. A woman in a red silk dress rose from the center table with a confidence that scratched at something quiet inside me, and the crowd tilted toward her as if pulled by a tide. I watched Ryan's profile go soft with pleasure, the practiced grin he wore whenever applause rippled. The woman's voice was satin and smoke, and I felt my throat tighten at the intimacy in her tone, the easy claim in her eyes. I lifted my glass because everyone else did, and the stem felt colder than it should have, almost like a warning pressed into my palm. In the shimmer of that moment, I knew the night would not end the way I had planned it. I knew the story I had polished for years was about to chip at the edges. Before I tell you how the first crack spread, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever rebuilt your life from the ground up, your stories help more people than you know. And if you're here for slow, honest justice without shouting or cruelty, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. We get through these things together, one steady breath at a time. My name is Samantha Collins, and for most of my 30s, I told myself I was a practical woman who made practical choices, the kind of daughter my mother raised in a small Ohio town where bills were folded twice and put away, and kindness wasn't a performance. When Mom died, she left me a careful cushion she called breathing room, and I carried those words like a talisman even after I moved to the city and married Ryan. We were 24 when we signed our first lease, the kind of apartment where you could watch the streetlights flicker through blinds and feel certain the future was waiting 2 floors down. He had plans that ran hot and fast. I had patience and a savings account with my mother's handwriting on the beneficiary line. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like partnership, his ambition, my ballast. We promised each other the usual vows with a few unspoken ones on the side, the ones that rise up when you're young and generous and convinced time will always keep pace with your faith. He would do night classes for his MBA. I would take on a heavier load at work until the tuition came due. He would chase the promotion ladder 2 rungs at a time. I would hold the ladder steady and nod whenever someone asked if we were thinking of kids. When Emma arrived, pink and fierce and hungry at 3 a.m, our world narrowed to soft blankets and bleary coffee and a future I could almost touch. The house came next, a modest 2-story with blue shutters and a maple out front that kept our summers shaded, paid for with what remained of my inheritance, and a mortgage we both signed with hopeful hands. There were years when our life moved like a reliable train schedule, daycare pickup lasagna, at 6 conference calls, whispering under closed doors. Saturdays at the park where Emma chased bubbles until her hair stuck to her forehead. We learned how to divide the chores and the holidays, how to be polite when we disagreed, how to present a tidy version of ourselves to neighbors who waved from driveways. Ryan started to wear better suits and speak in the clipped rhythm of people who measure their days in meetings, and I learned the art of waiting up without asking too many questions. On the good nights, he'd fall asleep with Emma on his chest, and I'd press my cheek to the warm curve of her back and think, this is worth the trade. Looking back, I can't say there was a single moment when the light changed. Only a slow dimming. I explained away, because that's what wives do when they're busy and tired and determined to protect the story they helped build. He guarded his phone like it was a second heartbeat and started shaving on weeknights, saying the gym's new protocol required it, and I told myself I was uncharitable to notice. A floral scent that didn't belong to me drifted through the car one Friday, and he laughed, said it must be air freshener from the valet. The truth has a patient step. It will take the long route through your life and still arrive exactly on time. I kept my head down and focused on Emma's spelling list, the grocery budget, the guest room I was painting in a pale, dignified blue for visitors we rarely had. If you lined up the photographs from those years, you would see what I now see. My smile fading half a shade at a time. His posture leaning a breath farther away, the space between us widening, like a hairline fracture in good china. Friends said we made a strong team, and most days I believed them because strength looks a lot like silence when you're the one doing the carrying. I trusted the promises we'd made and the receipts I kept in a tidy file proof that love could be built like anything else if you were willing to keep the ledger balanced. It felt sensible to assume we were fine because fine can be the last coat of paint before the wall gives way. The night of the gala, when the red dress rose and the room pivoted like sunflowers, I understood that my life had begun to tilt long before the lights dimmed. The glass was still cold in my hand when I told myself to breathe, to remember who paid for the ground under our feet, to remember that dignity is a kind of armor you can learn to wear even when your knees shake. I touched the stem of my flute and stared at the line of his jaw, the one I used to trace with my finger in the dark, and I decided I would not go home the same woman who had walked in. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the first proof would come from the smallest mouth in my house, delivered with the innocent brightness of a child who tells you everything because she hasn't yet learned to protect your heart. The first time I allowed myself to admit something was wrong, it wasn't because of late nights or a strange perfume clinging to his jacket. It was Emma's voice, high and innocent, floating from the kitchen table while she colored. I was slicing carrots for dinner, listening to her hum a tune she'd picked up at preschool, when she looked up and said, "Mommy, Daddy had ice cream with the pretty lady from his office today." My knife paused midair, the blade suspended above the cutting board. I forced my voice to stay calm, asking her what lady she meant. She grinned and said the one with shiny red shoes, the one who gave her a balloon. She went back to coloring as if she hadn't just cracked open the ground beneath me. I stood frozen in that kitchen, every sound magnified: the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the scratch of Emma's crayon against paper. It would have been easy to dismiss, to pretend she had misunderstood. Children blur details, mix up faces, forget what belongs where. But I knew better. I remembered the name I had seen once on a company email, the casual way Ryan had mentioned her, the photo I stumbled across when I borrowed his phone, and he snatched it back too quickly. Maya Reed. The name landed heavy, now lodged in the pit of my stomach. For days, I told myself not to leap to conclusions, not to blow apart a marriage on the word of a child who loved balloons. But the seed had been planted, and once you begin to notice, you can't unsee. Ryan's phone never left his pocket, even when he showered. He started going to the gym late at night, coming home showered and smooth, as though trying on a different skin. His excuses came, rehearsed, his patience shorter, his smile practiced like a salesman at the end of a long day. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but the weight in my chest said otherwise. One evening, after I tucked Emma into bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire, a woman from the neighborhood whose husband worked at the same firm as Ryan. She had never been more than an acquaintance, the kind you wave to while unloading groceries, but the message was urgent. "I think you need to see this," she wrote, followed by screenshots. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages between Ryan and Maya that left no room for doubt. There were jokes laced with innuendo compliments that turned explicit talk of hotel rooms and private nights disguised as business. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact laid out in black and white. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone until my vision blurred. My pulse slowed instead of quickening, as though my body already knew and was simply catching up. The betrayal didn't rush in like a storm. It seeped in quiet and unstoppable until there was no corner of my life untouched. I thought about the nights I stayed awake with Emma when she was sick about the inheritance I drained so he could chase his degree, about the sacrifices I made, believing they were for our future. And here he was spending late nights in someone else's company while I painted nurseries and balanced bills. Ryan's behavior grew bolder once I started noticing. He stopped offering explanations altogether, as if my silence was agreement. He came home later and later, his shirt smelling faintly of perfume. I didn't own, his eyes avoiding mine as he headed straight for the shower. On the nights he did sit at the table with us, he scrolled through his phone while Emma chattered about school, nodding absently. I began to wonder if he noticed her drawings taped to the fridge, if he heard her when she asked him to play. It wasn't just me he was abandoning. It was both of us. Still, I kept quiet. I smiled for the neighbors, showed up at company functions in dresses bought on clearance racks, and let everyone believe we were the picture of stability. I told myself that speaking too soon could break things beyond repair, that maybe he would snap out of it, remember the life we built. But deep down, I knew. The woman in red shoes had already staked her place in his world, and he was letting her. The confirmation I dreaded came at the gala when Maya stood to raise her glass, her voice heavy with suggestion, her words painting nights I was never a part of. She wasn't subtle. She wanted me to hear, wanted the room to hear. Ryan laughed too quickly, too nervously, but he didn't stop her. He let her humiliate me in front of colleagues and strangers alike. That was the moment something hardened inside me. I realized this wasn't just about infidelity, it was about theft. He had taken my money, my trust, my years, and built himself into the man under that spotlight, only to hand it all to someone else. When the applause ended and the room returned to chatter, I walked out with my head high, but my heart was raw. Outside the ballroom doors, the cool air hit my face, and I understood that the cracks in our marriage were not cracks anymore. They were fractures wide and deep, and I had a choice to make. I could keep patching them with silence, or I could step into the storm and let it all break. What I didn't know then was how quickly that storm would come, or how much strength I would find when I finally stopped trying to hold it all together. The night of the gala stayed with me like a bruise, the kind you keep brushing against no matter how carefully you move. I lay in bed at Lauren's guest room, staring at the ceiling, the glow from my phone flashing over and over with Ryan's name. Every vibration felt like a reminder that I had been pushed out of my own marriage in front of 200 people. The sting wasn't just in the betrayal. It was in the spectacle, the way he allowed someone else to define me before I could even open my mouth. I thought I would feel broken, but what surprised me was the calm that replaced the shaking. The tears never came, only a stillness that spread through me like a winter frost. I saw myself standing in that ballroom, my hand steady as I raised my glass, my voice carrying through the silence. I replayed the gasps, the whispers, the look on Ryan's face when his suit was drenched with champagne. That moment had stripped something from me, yes, but it had also revealed something I hadn't recognized in years. Beneath the exhaustion and silence, there was steel. The next morning, while Emma ate cereal at Lauren's kitchen table, I watched her swing her legs and laugh at a cartoon, completely unaware of how the ground had shifted. I felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on me. I couldn't collapse, not with her eyes so bright and her world so small. I held my coffee cup with both hands, as if warming myself by it, whispering that I needed to hold steady for her. The betrayal wasn't only about me, it was about the example being set for my daughter about the life she was watching unfold. The phone kept buzzing that day. Ryan's messages moved from desperate to angry, from, "We need to talk to you," "Embarrassed yourself," as if rewriting the story would change its ending. I scrolled through them without replying, feeling something shift each time I refused to respond. Silence had never been my weapon, but it became one in those hours. Every unanswered call felt like a small reclamation of the voice I had buried in our marriage. When night fell, I sat with Lauren in her living room. The kids were upstairs asleep, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the heater. She asked gently if I was all right, her eyes soft but steady, and I realized I had been holding my breath for years. The words poured out not in sobs, but in a steady current. How I had given him my inheritance, how I had built our home, how I had stayed awake with Emma while he climbed ladders in boardrooms. Lauren listened, without interrupting, just nodding her hand, resting over mine. For the first time, I said out loud that I felt invisible, that I had been carrying a weight that was never shared. That night, I lay awake, Emma's soft breathing coming from the next room, and let myself admit what I had avoided for years. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't too sensitive. I was a wife who had been erased from her own story. A woman who had invested everything into someone who repaid her with secrecy and humiliation. My silence had protected him, not me, and the realization hurt more than any text message or perfume stain ever could. The house we had built together came back to me in flashes. The nursery walls I painted while he claimed late-night dinners, the mortgage payments I tracked while he booked hotels under corporate expenses. Each memory was like a pin driven into me, sharp and undeniable. I thought of Emma growing up in a home where her mother stayed quiet, teaching her without words that betrayal was something to endure. The thought chilled me more than anything Ryan had done. I began to notice the small ways I had disappeared. The hobbies I stopped pursuing, the friends I stopped calling back, the laughter that had slipped from my life without me realizing. I remembered sitting across from Ryan at dinner, trying to tell him about a freelance project I had considered, only for him to wave it off, saying it wouldn't bring in enough to matter. My voice had dimmed in those years, little by little, until the only part of me that still felt visible was the one applauding his success. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something stronger was forming. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a resolve that tightened like a knot being pulled. I thought of my mother's words, her insistence that the money she left me was meant to give me freedom, not chains. I had spent it building a future for someone who forgot who laid the foundation. In the quiet of Lauren's guest room, I promised myself I wouldn't let that legacy end as silence. By the end of that week, the whispers had begun. A neighbor asked casually how the gala had gone, her eyes lingering a little too long, as if she already knew. Friends texted vague messages of support without saying why. The story was moving, spreading faster than I could control, but for once, I didn't feel the urge to chase it down. Let it travel, I thought. Let the world see what he tried to hide. At night, I stood at the window with the curtains drawn, staring out at the streetlights while Emma slept. My reflection stared back at me, tired, but steadier than I had expected. I felt the weight of the years I had carried him, the sacrifices I had folded into our days, and I whispered to my own image that I was done being erased. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but now it was paired with a clarity I had never allowed myself before. When Ryan finally called one last time, his voice breaking as he begged me not to destroy what we had, I let the phone ring until it stopped. I set it down on the nightstand, my hand still for the first time in days. I realized then that the quiet wasn't empty. It was powerful. I was no longer clinging to the hope that he would change. I was beginning to understand that I could. And as the night deepened, I knew the stillness wouldn't last. The moment would come when silence would no longer be enough, when pain would need to turn into action. What I didn't know yet was just how ready I was becoming. to make that shift. The morning after the gala, I woke up with makeup still clinging to my skin, the faint smell of champagne on my hands, and my phone buzzing with Ryan's name over and over. I sat up slowly, the sheets twisted around me in Lauren's guest room, and listened to the pattern of his messages. Some were pleading, others sharp, as if the right tone could undo the spectacle of the night before. I scrolled through them in silence, my thumb hovering over the call button, once then falling away. He didn't deserve my voice. Not anymore. I brewed coffee in Lauren's kitchen while she got the kids ready for school, the hum of a cartoon drifting from the living room where Emma sat cross-legged with her cereal bowl. I stared at the steam rising from the mug in my hands and realized I hadn't made a list for myself in years. Everything I had written down for so long was about him, his schedule, his conferences, his expenses, his meals. That morning, I opened my laptop and typed my own. Not what went wrong, not questions about why he strayed, but practical, deliberate steps. Lawyers, banks, locks, daycare arrangements. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I was steady, and steadiness was dangerous for him. By noon, I was speaking with Diane Mercer, a divorce attorney recommended by one of Lauren's co-workers. Her voice on the phone was calm, efficient, and free of the pity I dreaded. She listened without interrupting, then gave me instructions with a clarity that steadied my hands. Gather financial records. Secure proof of infidelity. Move funds into accounts he couldn't touch. We'll use his arrogance against him, she said, and the words rang like a promise. I wrote everything down the pen, pressing hard into the page, each line a step closer to freedom. That afternoon, I logged into our joint account. Ryan's carelessness played out in numbers on a screen, dinners billed as business hotel stays, disguised as conferences, jewelry purchases timed during nights. I was home alone with a sick child. My chest didn't burn the way I expected. Instead, I moved steadily, transferring what I had earned and what had always been mine into a separate account with my name only. When the screen confirmed the transfer, I leaned back in the chair and exhaled. It wasn't victory, but it was armor. By evening, I had called a locksmith. Lauren drove me back to the house while Emma chattered in the back seat about her day, her voice light against the heavy silence between us. When we pulled into the driveway, the locksmith was finishing the new locks. I stood at the foot of the steps, folder in hand, when Ryan's car pulled in behind us. His tie hung loose, his eyes bloodshot, his expression caught between disbelief and rage. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, striding toward the door. "Security!" I answered, my voice flat. He tried to push past me, but the locksmith blocked his way. "New locks," the man said, calmly authorized by the homeowner. "I'm the homeowner," Ryan snapped, his voice carrying. I held up the folder with the deed, my name clear on the page. "No," I told him quietly. "You're a guest, one who just overstayed his welcome." His face flushed red, the veins in his neck tightening as he looked at me. "Sam, don't do this," he said, dropping his tone to something softer, almost pleading. "Think about Emma. Think about what this looks like." I stepped closer, close enough that he couldn't mistake my voice for weakness. "I am thinking about Emma. I'm thinking about the kind of man she sees as a role model, and I'd rather raise her alone than teach her lies are normal." For the first time, he had no words. His jaw clenched, his hands fisted at his sides, but his voice faltered. I closed the folder, turned, and walked inside without waiting for his response. Behind me, I heard him curse and kick at the steps, his voice calling my name like it still held weight. It didn't. Not anymore. That night, Emma slept upstairs in her own bed while I sat with Lauren on the couch, a cup of tea warming my hands. My body felt drained, but my mind was sharp, as if something had finally clicked into place. I wasn't the woman who stood smiling in the shadows at the gala waiting to be acknowledged. I was someone else now, someone deliberate, someone who would never again be erased by another person's choices. The quiet in the house felt different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or loss. It was a silence of space, reclaimed, a silence that told me I had begun. I knew Ryan would come back angrier and more desperate, but for the first time, I didn't dread it. I was no longer a wife waiting for explanations. I was a strategist preparing for the next move. The road ahead would not be smooth. I could already feel the weight of the battles to come, courts, family, whispers, friends caught in the middle. But sitting there with the tea cooling in my hands, I understood that my turning point had already arrived. Ryan thought the gala marked the peak of his career. He didn't realize it was also the night he lost control of me. And as I turned off the lights climbing the stairs to check on Emma, I knew something with absolute certainty. The woman he underestimated was gone. In her place was someone who would not stop until the truth was no longer his to twist. The morning after I changed the locks, sunlight streamed through the kitchen blinds like a spotlight on a stage I hadn't asked to step onto. My phone buzzed steadily with messages I didn't answer, some from Ryan, some from numbers I barely recognized. By 9, the first whispers of the gala were circulating online. Friends sent links without comment, short clips, where my glass flashed in the air before I hurled its contents across Ryan's suit. I watched once just long enough to see the laughter and gasps from strangers, then set my phone face down. The image of him blinking through champagne wasn't revenge. It was simply the beginning. By noon, the ripple had already reached his office. His executive assistant left a frazzled voicemail on our home line, her voice catching as she mentioned charges on the corporate card and a request from accounting for immediate reconciliation. I didn't need to push that fire along. Ryan had done it himself. The joint account transfers and my lawyer's freeze orders would tangle perfectly with the mess he left behind. I poured myself another cup of coffee, steadying my breath. Public ruin was inevitable, and inevitability was the sweetest form of justice. Word spread quickly in our neighborhood, too. At the grocery store, I caught 2 women from down the street whispering near the produce section, their eyes darting toward me and then away. When I turned down the cereal aisle, one of them muttered something about that gala video. I kept walking my cart, rolling steady. Emma perched on the seat, singing softly to herself. Let them whisper. Every story they told meant less control for him. Maya's name surfaced soon after. Through a friend of a friend, I learned she'd been called into HR for what they described as a routine meeting. In the corporate world, routine was rarely routine. By the end of the week, she had been suspended, her bright smile gone from the lobby. Former allies avoided her in hallways, and I heard that one woman who once laughed loudest at her jokes now offered only curt nods. Collateral damage was inevitable. She had chosen her role in this play. At home, Emma's teacher pulled me aside at pickup, her face gentle but searching. She's been asking about her daddy, she said quietly. Is everything all right? I bent down to adjust Emma's backpack strap and nodded, my voice even. She's safe. That's what matters. The teacher touched my arm in a brief gesture of understanding, and I carried Emma to the car, her small hand clutching mine. Protecting her from the spectacle had become my guiding line, sharper than anger and steadier than fear. That evening, Ryan arrived with a lawyer I didn't recognize and a phone held up by someone clearly recording. He banged on the new door until Lauren opened it, her eyes cold and her arms crossed. He demanded to come in to see Emma to talk. Lauren stood firm. She isn't here, and you need to leave. His voice cracked between anger and pleading, growing louder as neighbors gathered at the edges of the yard. Someone pulled out their phone recording the scene as he insisted I was unstable, that the gala was just stress. I watched from upstairs, Emma asleep in her bed, while the locksmith explained calmly from the porch that the locks were changed legally. Ryan's face shifted from fury to panic, his eyes darting toward the camera as though someone would rescue his narrative. No one did. Inside, I let my phone buzz on the nightstand unanswered, while his voice carried faintly through the closed window. When the shouting finally ended and his car pulled away, the quiet settled like a blanket. It was my quiet, not his, and I intended to keep it. That night, I tucked Emma in and smoothed her hair, whispering promises I intended to keep. Promises of stability, of safety, of mornings where her mother's eyes weren't swollen from crying. She sighed in her sleep, her lips curling into a half smile, and I knew I was stronger than his chaos. The days that followed confirmed what I already sensed: he wasn't folding. He was flailing. Mutual friends relayed that he told anyone who would listen I had suffered a breakdown, that the gala had been my outburst, that his late nights were harmless. But stories like his don't hold weight in the digital age. The clip of my toast spread like wildfire, carried further by women who saw themselves in my words. Even without me speaking again, the narrative belonged to me now. His silence, once a shield, had become evidence. When Margaret, his sister, invited me to her birthday dinner, I hesitated. She texted, "You're still family. He doesn't get to erase you." The restaurant was upscale, all polished wood, and waiters who glided instead of walked. I arrived 10 minutes late, deliberately, and felt the air change as I entered. Heads turned, conversations dipped, and Ryan's jaw slackened when he saw me. Maya sat beside him, her smile faltering into stiffness as I slid into the empty chair across from them. I opened the menu calmly, as if I belonged there, because I did. For 20 minutes, the air strained with false laughter and stilted conversation. Ryan pressed Maya's hand tightly, his voice rising too brightly, his eyes darting in my direction. I let him perform. I let the act stretch thin. Then, as the entrees arrived, I placed my fork down and pulled out my phone. "Since we're celebrating tonight," I said, my voice cutting through the clink of silverware. "Let's be honest." I set the phone on the table, its screen glowing with the PDF of bank statements. Rows of charges, dinners, hotels, jewelry, all logged during the years I stayed home with Emma. A gasp spread across the table like a wave. Margaret leaned forward, her hand covering her mouth. Ryan lunged for the phone, his face flushed. "This is private," he hissed. I met his eyes steady. "No, Ryan. This is public because you made it public the night your mistress toasted you in front of everyone." The room erupted into whispers, chairs scraping as people craned to see. Maya stiffened, her face drained of color. I pulled a second envelope from my purse, sliding it across the linen, a collection of his messages to her, explicit and smug. "That's not stress," I said evenly. "That's betrayal." Maya shoved her chair back, muttering under her breath as she fled toward the door. Half the room watched her go, the sound of her heels echoing across polished floors. Ryan's voice cracked as he tried to recover, hurling words at me meant to sting. Vindictive, he spat. I laughed once, quietly but sharp. "No, Ryan." Just finished being silent. I rose from my chair, pushing it back against the floor. My hands rested flat on the tablecloth, steady as stone. "You thought I would stay quiet, that I would keep paying the bills and raising our daughter while you paraded her around. You forgot that silence is complicity, and I will not be complicit in my own humiliation." I lifted my glass of water and raised it slightly. "Here's my toast," I said, my voice carrying past the table to the surrounding diners. "To the man who lost everything the moment he underestimated his wife." A murmur of applause spread around the room, some clapping, others nodding. Ryan sat frozen, his reputation splintering before his very eyes. I left him there, surrounded by whispers. Margaret's eyes wet as she touched my arm and whispered, "I'm sorry." I gave her a faint smile. He's the one who owes apologies. As I stepped out into the cool night, the buzz of my phone began again. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers forwarding clips already making their way online. My words were repeating without me a chorus I hadn't expected, but welcomed. Every whisper, every video, every caption was another nail in the image Ryan had so carefully built. I walked toward my car with my head high, knowing the storm had only begun. And deep inside, I understood something else. Silence had been my shield once, but now it was my weapon. The time for whispers was over. The world had started listening, and I was not about to stop speaking. The night I walked out of Margaret's birthday dinner, I thought the worst of it was behind me. I had said what I needed to say, laid the proof in front of him, and watched his mistress walk away in silence. Yet by the time I reached home, my phone was lighting up like a beacon in the dark. Clips of my words were already circulating. My glass raised high, my voice steady, as I told him he lost everything when he underestimated me. By morning, that sentence was everywhere. People were repeating it online, stitching it into videos, typing it under photographs of ruined castles and broken crowns. The more I ignored it, the faster it spread. Ryan's first move was to pretend nothing had happened. He posted a stiff photo of himself in a navy suit with a caption about rising above negativity. Within minutes, comments poured in, cutting him down line by line. "Maybe rise above your mistress instead," one wrote. Another linked receipts of his expenses, the very ones I had placed on the table. Silence no longer shielded him. Every attempt he made to polish his image became another stone in his pocket, dragging him further down. A few days later, he tried a different tactic. A glossy business magazine published a feature with his photograph on the cover, his smile airbrushed to perfection. The headline screamed of denial, calling my actions a bitter attack from a wife who misunderstood his professional mentoring. He painted himself as the victim, suggesting stress had caused me to lash out. Reading the article, I felt laughter rise in my throat, sharp and disbelieving. In an age where receipts were currency, he was bankrupt. By the time I closed the magazine, the internet had already dismantled his claims, women flooding comment sections with their own stories of gaslighting men, pointing out his tone-deaf deflections. The cracks widened when Maya's words leaked. She had written in what she thought was a private group chat, mocking me as clueless, bragging about their nights, admitting she believed he would leave me sooner. Screenshots surfaced and spread like wildfire, leaving her defenseless. Her accounts went silent within hours, her profile stripped bare, her name becoming shorthand for betrayal in professional circles. I didn't need to lift a finger. She had destroyed her own reputation. Ryan grew desperate. One night, long after Emma was asleep, a notification popped up on my phone. He had gone live from his car. His face filled the screen, eyes red, voice shaky, as he rambled about stress, about betrayal, cutting both ways, about being set up to fail. He tried to make his voice tremble in the right places, hoping to seem human, but the internet is merciless. By morning, clips of him weeping behind the steering wheel were everywhere, captioned with words that mocked rather than sympathized. My lawyer, Diane, called me the next day. "He just destroyed his own credibility," she said, her voice brisk. "No judge will take him seriously now." Meanwhile, my silence only sharpened the contrast. I gave no interviews, no public statements. I went about my days quietly, dropping Emma at preschool, making her favorite pancakes on Saturdays, walking through grocery aisles with my head high. Friends sent texts saying I was winning without trying, But I wasn't winning. I was preparing. Every stumble he made, every failed attempt to control the narrative, became another brick in the wall I was building between us. Then came the announcement from his company. It wasn't public at first, but leaks always find their way out. The board was reviewing his conduct, both financial and personal. The promotion that was supposed to crown his career was suddenly under evaluation. I pictured him pacing in his rented condo, reading emails that once brought him power and now delivered suspicion. For years, he had relied on appearances to shield him. Now, appearance had become evidence. At home, the chaos felt distant, like thunder rolling miles away. Emma colored at the kitchen table, humming softly, while I checked emails for small freelance projects that were beginning to grow. The quiet moments with her were my anchor. I shielded her from questions as best I could, telling her simply that Daddy was busy, that she was safe, that our home was steady. She accepted it with the simple trust of a child who believes her mother's word is enough. Still, I knew Ryan wasn't finished. Men like him rarely fold when the walls close in. They thrash, they plead, they try to reshape the story until it bends their way. But the difference now was that his voice no longer mattered. The world had chosen its side, and this time it wasn't his. The sound of my own words echoed by strangers was proof that silence had ended. My story was no longer mine alone. It had become something larger, a truth he could never scrub away. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft rhythm of Emma's breathing, I understood something with absolute clarity. His downfall was no longer a possibility. It was a process already in motion, steady and unstoppable. All I had to do was keep walking, one careful step at a time, until there was nothing left of the empire he built on my silence. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, a space designed to strip pretense and leave only facts behind. Diane sat beside me, her binder stacked so high, the bailiff raised his eyebrows when she carried them in. Each tab, each page, each receipt was evidence of years I could never get back. Across the aisle, Ryan walked in wearing a tailored suit that seemed to sag under its own weight. His new lawyer followed a man whose cufflinks gleamed, but whose expression dimmed once he glimpsed the size of Diane's files. When Judge Bennett entered the room, shifted into silence. He was a man used to order, and his eyes swept across the benches like someone accustomed to finding the truth beneath performances. Ryan straightened, puffing himself up as if posture alone could convince the court. Diane opened the first binder without a word, sliding evidence forward with the precision of a surgeon. Hotel charges during my pregnancy, jewelry purchased while Emma was sick, corporate expenses logged on weekends he claimed were spent at conferences. Each page was a nail hammered into the coffin of his credibility. The judge asked simple questions, his tone calm but unyielding. "Mr. Collins, can you explain these charges?" Ryan began with a rehearsed speech, weaving excuses about client entertainment and professional obligations. But when the Gala video was played, his words faltered. The room filled with the sound of Maya's toast, her voice dripping with innuendo, followed by my own steady glass raised in reply. I kept my eyes on this table, refusing to give him the satisfaction of my gaze. By the time the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was sharper than any cross-examination. Diane pressed further. She showed the inheritance transfer, the deed, with my name alone, the account balances I had secured before he could drain them. Ryan's lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled with a wave of his hand. "The financial record speaks clearly," he said, his voice even. Ryan's shoulders slumped, his confidence crumbling piece by piece. Custody was next, the part that mattered more than any house or car. Diane presented Emma's routine, the preschool schedule, the pediatric visits, the bedtime rituals I had documented in careful notes. Then she held up printouts of Ryan's late-night live streams, his voice rambling, his face blurred with tears. "Is this stability?" she asked quietly, letting the question hang. Ryan's lawyer tried to spin it as vulnerability, but the judge shook his head. "Supervised visitation," he ruled. "Primary custody remains with the mother." Ryan's face drained of color, his lips parting as if to protest, but no sound came out. When the gavel fell at the end of the hearing, the echo carried like thunder. I exhaled slowly, my grip loosening on the edge of the table. The house was mine. The accounts were secured. Emma was safe. Ryan's empire had collapsed under the weight of its own lies. He stormed out without looking at me, his lawyer trailing behind, expression weary. Diane leaned closer, her voice low. "You held your ground. That's all that mattered." I nodded, though inside I felt more emptied than victorious. Justice, when it arrives, doesn't erase the years that led to it. It only balances the scales. The fallout spread quickly. Ryan's father, who once bragged about his son's promise, called me privately. His voice was tight shame threaded through every word. "You'll always be Emma's mother," he said. "You'll always have our respect." I thanked him, though I didn't need his blessing to know where I stood. His brother, who had defended him for years, withdrew too, admitting he couldn't risk his own business being tied to the scandal. Even the people who once laughed at his jokes at company parties now avoided his name, their silence sharper than any condemnation. Maya's end came swiftly. HR concluded its investigation and terminated her employment, citing misconduct and reputational risk. No glowing references, no graceful exit. She tried to reinvent herself online, posting vague notes about toxic women and unfair treatment, but every comment section turned into a battlefield. Within weeks, she vanished from social media altogether. She had chosen her stage at the Gala, and the curtain had closed on her for good. Meanwhile, Ryan unraveled. His condo fell into default, the sleek black BMW repossessed in front of neighbors who once admired it. He moved into a spare room at a friend's place, then into a rental so shabby that even acquaintances whispered about the fall. Each consulting job he applied for ended with the same result: Google searches that pulled up hashtags, memes, and court records before any resume could speak. He had once told me success was about control, about bending circumstances until they broke your way. Now he was the one broken, his name stripped of its shine. Through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't post, didn't gloat, didn't feed the spectacle. My silence became louder than his chaos, every court ruling, every repossession, every closed door speaking for me. When the final divorce decree arrived, stamped and signed, I sat at my kitchen table with the paper resting in my hands. The house was mine, the accounts were mine, and most importantly, Emma's world was secure. Ryan had nothing left but the rubble of his choices. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. The neighborhood hushed around me. The air smelled of cut grass and cool earth, ordinary scents that felt extraordinary in their peace. I thought of the girl I had been painting a nursery while he was away, believing love meant sacrifice without end. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that silence is not submission, it is strategy, and sometimes it is the sharpest blade of all. Still, I knew the story wasn't entirely over. Men like Ryan don't disappear quietly. They linger, they plead, they search for one last foothold. I could feel it in the way my phone lit up with his number weeks later, in the way his voice cracked when he left a message asking for a meeting. He said he wanted closure, a chance to talk for Emma's sake. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but part of me knew that to close this chapter fully, I would need to look him in the eye one last time. And so, with the decree still fresh in its envelope on my desk, I agreed to meet. Not to reconcile, not to reopen wounds, but to see the man who had once held everything in his hands, now left with nothing but the echo of his own downfall. We met in a small cafe not far from the courthouse, the kind of place with scratched wooden tables and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. I arrived first, sitting by the window with a cup I didn't touch. When Ryan walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The crisp lines of his suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled shirt that looked slept in his shoulders, bent his eyes dull with exhaustion. He sat across from me with a heaviness I had never seen before, and for a moment I felt the ghost of the man I once loved flicker through the wreck. He started with apologies, his words stumbling over each other, but they sounded thin, as if even he no longer believed them. He spoke of fear of wanting control of how Maya had made him feel powerful when he felt small. His hands shook as he reached across the table, but I didn't move to meet them. I listened steady until he trailed off into silence. Then I told him what I had come to understand, that he hadn't just betrayed me, he had burned through everything we built, and I would not be the one to sweep up the ashes. When I stood to leave, he looked up at me with tears filling his eyes, whispering that he didn't know who he was without me. I placed my bag over my shoulder and told him gently that it was time he found out. Then I walked out of that cafe into the cool afternoon light, and for the first time in years, the weight I carried slipped from my shoulders. A year later, laughter fills my kitchen, where silence once lived. Emma sits on the counter, dipping strawberries into melted chocolate, her cheeks sticky and pink as she tells me stories about her friends at school. The walls are painted in colors I chose soft and forgiving, not the shades he once insisted upon. At night, she falls asleep without tears, and I rest knowing she is safe. Her world no longer fractured by secrets she can't understand. Work has taken on a new shape too. The savings I once funneled into Ryan's ambitions now fuel my own. I built a small consultancy, quiet at first, then busier as word spread. Many of my first clients were women who had seen the videos of the Gala or the dinner women who admired how I carried myself through the storm. I never set out to be anyone's example, but sometimes survival creates its own light, and people are drawn to it. As for Ryan, his name surfaces now and then in whispers, but it carries no power. I heard he rents a shabby apartment outside the city taking odd consulting work no one respects. His family keeps their distance, his friends have slipped away, and Maya is long gone. Once I saw him on a street corner while driving home thinner, older, his eyes darting as if he were waiting for someone who would never arrive. I did not stop. I did not even slow down. Looking back, I don't regret the years, not even the painful ones. Without them, I wouldn't have Emma, and I wouldn't have discovered the steel I once mistook for weakness. Betrayal stripped away the illusions, but it also built the woman who now stands firmly on her own. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's ambition. I measure it by the peace in my home, the laughter of my daughter, and the quiet strength I carry into every room. If there is a lesson in all of this, it's that silence can protect, but it can also destroy. The moment I chose to stop being silent was the moment I began reclaiming myself. Dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you decide never to surrender, no matter how much you love or how much you lose. And tonight, as I sit on my porch with a glass of wine, listening to the hum of the neighborhood settling in for the evening, I know this truth with certainty. Ryan underestimated me, and he lost everything. I underestimated myself, and I found everything I needed. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts if you'd like. And may we all remember that strength sometimes begins the moment we stop being silent.